keep telling people that I'm committed to a process, not a conclusion. And what I mean by that, there is a lot of skepticism involved in being disciplined. And I'm not talking about the guy on the street who says, I'm just skeptical. I just doubt everything. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who have a discipline that they are practicing. Let's take linguistics. Let's take translating. Let's take a particular passage like De Cauthentis Unic Pisteos. If I were to tell you that I followed the modeling, namely of, let's say, a theory that was provided to us centuries ago, I would have been someone committed to a conclusion. But since I did not follow that particular paradigm, I simply started looking at the value of how things change over time. That is because we have a little bit more data. And this is why Dr. Harris, Daniel Wallace's, and he's a very famous grammarian in the Protestant movement. He's a very good author. However, I do not agree with his works, that is, in his Greek grammar, simply because they are an exegetical put together. In other words, he's saying things about grammar in order to exegete it in a fashion that would yield a Protestant understanding. But I do appreciate many of the things that he does state within the grammar itself. Dr. Carl Conrad from Washington University pushed back big time on why he took that approach, but this is where I'm at. I like a multi-axial approach in that we can look at different models, that is, of the text, and we can use various hermeneutics. And yes, some of them are better than others. And so when people ask me what is the best translation model, extant translation model, that's difficult to answer simply because not everything is based upon the same text base. And so it's not like the questions being asked in an apples-to-apples conversation or an apples-to-apples situation. Every translation is not based upon the same theory. For instance, some people use a form-critical method of translating. Others use what's called a dynamic. Others use more of an oblique technique. Others use just simply a direct technique. And some of you guys will get that without going too much further. However, in linguistics, we've come a long, long way. We have shifted the paradigm quite a bit because of people like Noam Chomsky and others who insist that there's an issue concerning form, but that's more of a morphological construct and less of a functional issue. And we see that people, when they speak, they do have patterns, but these patterns do have function to them. And so when we try to make too much noise over patterns and not enough about function, all of a sudden that's a completely different thing. And this is where I would caution people in mathematics when they offer, like Lawrence Krauss, theoretical physicist. He offers many things in the context of mathematics, but yet at the same time, we can't get stuck in form, or we are going to start thinking along the lines of something that's so synthetic would make absolutely no sense. And he understands that. However, what he tries to sell in the name of atheism, I think, becomes a little bit absurd. And we will do a show on some of those absurdities that I think that he's getting involved in, especially the equivocating that he's intentionally doing in light of many of the different models that many theologians have put on the table. But with that said, I'd like to bring Bob in. Bob, hello. What's going on?
Well, greetings. It's a wonderful day. Today was a little bit nicer than the last few days. Friday, we got a ton of snow up here, and
Wow.
about 10 inches, yeah.
That expression, a ton of snow, someone not familiar with English, would they really understand that expression easily?
Not sure, but I mean, the truth is how much the snow really weighed that was down there and it fell. It's probably a lot more than a ton.
Yes,
But
I think some of the guys here got pickled last night, and so
I wonder what that means. Yeah.
it's fun to play with language. But I guess my point is tonight we're talking about suspending judgment in light of some of the things that we do. And I've confessed that if I deal with Decauthentes unic pisteos, one of the things that I have to look at in a serious context, the aorist tense, as you know, we really don't even understand that tense yet. And it takes a willingness of simply saying, okay, we do have this model, but let's not jump off the cliff with one model of this particular tense. Many of these authors are not so tense-driven as they are involved in something called action sort, and especially in Hebrew, we're talking about a tenseless language, and yet people think it's wonderful to translate that into a tense-driven language, and you're really wrapping your mind around what they said, that is in a tenseless context. And so when you're speaking and it's more about aspect as opposed to tense, you're not comparing apples to apples, not even apples to oranges. You're comparing apples to Cadillacs. I mean, it's so different. It's hard to get people to see that, and it's hard to get people to see that when it comes to the question of God, most people try to tether it to existence only, and evidence within the context of existence. And there are at least 25 different models that the ancients provided that's never talked about, that is in the great debate. And I keep trying to make some noise about it. In fact, I would like to bring up some of these models, that is of God, that are well outside of the context of what we hear today, simply because I think that we've gone backwards, namely in the debate. And I think the debate is more targeted toward fundamentalists and that rhetoric
Yes.
than it is something that's a little bit more measured. And so I'm
Right.
trying to get atheists and theists alike simply to take a little bit more time and get a breath of fresh air and say, first of all, we don't need to have conversational bias. Let's not come with an agenda of just talking points. Let's come here to listen as well. And so let's get this dialogue going on, because I would imagine if we did so, we would probably suspend judgment on many things, because the value in suspending judgment when I'm talking with you and we have extremely valuable conversations, it's because in real time what you mean by your words, sometimes you just go off the beaten path. It's not like you're always the same yesterday, today, and forever. That is with your language usage. Bob Graves has the capacity to keep moving on. This is where Noam Chomsky is, and you're somewhat like a Chomsky, possibly better. And so
Please.
I get the benefit of that simply because I'm willing to suspend judgment on your surface structure. I'm willing to do the work necessary to tease out what you mean. But so many times we've had very educated people on this show who have really, in a sense, clashed with you simply because they were not willing to deal with the deep structure in real time, that is, of what you're saying. And so why is that, Bob? What are your thoughts?
Well, when we're committed to a conclusion and we hear somebody else stating something that is either coming from a different conclusion or suggesting the possibility that a different conclusion could be considered, for some reason, many times we think of this as a threat. We identify too much with the way we've been thinking, almost as if we. Almost as if it would be a painful thing for us to think that maybe my thinking wasn't quite correct. And there's a sense in which, if you have an adequate sense of self, your thinking is just just ideas you're trying to come up with. I tell you, one of the hardest things to do is to actually come to a conclusion, but still be committed to the process. So, which means that this process leads me away from my conclusion. Well, so long, you know. Um, and so I think that there's this perhaps a sense of threat that may be going on. Also, many times people will come to a conclusion that they feel is essential to good outcomes, and that therefore people who have different conclusions might thereby threaten the well-being of us all or something, a
True.
little bit of drama in there. So I mentioned there's a number of reasons, but it's um, we also, I think we live in a culture where people are expected to be competent in an unrealistic way, such that I'm supposed to have solid conclusions. I'm supposed to have unassailable opinions. And if somebody can offer a very different opinion than my own, oh my goodness, this is showing cracks in my weakness. The weakness that I have is just a human brain. And so I think these things are false fears. But if we embrace these ideas, it can cause us to just not handle well the disagreements or different perspectives. You remember what I told you when we were talking together. I said something like, you need to sit in a different chair, not made with your opinion, in order to listen to someone you disagree with.
Well, that's powerful. Say that again.
You need to sit in a different chair, not made of your opinion, in order to listen to someone you disagree with.
See, that's what I'm talking about. It's like suspending judgment as a part of the process. And you said a while ago, we can form, let's say, an opinion on something, but we don't need to jump.
We can
don't
still
need to-
remain committed to the process.
Right. We don't need to be committed to the conclusion. In other words, we need to,
You
keep
can
our-
have a conclusion that you're not committed to.
right. In other words, let's keep the viewpoint wide. In other words, it's like, I keep going back to A plus B equals C. The algebra teacher says, little Johnny, you said A is a goat. That might well be true. Little Susie says it's not a goat. Well, that may be true. But let's say that little Johnny could be right, little Susie could be right. But let's back away and let's explore a little bit. Why would we want to commit to little Johnny or little Susie? They've offered two suggestions. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but they really don't have a method behind their madness. They don't have anything compelling that would lead them in that direction. And so when it comes to the question of God, what do we have? I keep saying that theism and atheism have nothing compelling. And I keep having people who keep pushing back on that. They feel as if they have something extremely compelling, and I simply don't see it. Maybe I'm blind, but could you fill in the blanks for me?
Well, the world of science is not entirely honest with itself, in that there's a great deal of commitment to conclusion, even in the world of science. But overall, the world of science experiences its occasional revolutions and occasional moving forward. But science is defined ideally as the reaching of conclusions that while you remain committed to the process of using your methodologies that you've developed to falsify, explore, see what else might actually be the case, answer deeper questions. And often it leads to coming to very different conclusions than what we've had in the past. And so science is, in the long run, overall, just such a process that is committed to the process and not to the conclusions.
Let me read something, and this comes from Wikipedia, and I really respect those who do contribute much to Wikipedia. And let me read this. It's very, very simple. It says, suspension of judgment is a cornerstone of standard research methodology. I agree with that. Much of the scientific method is designed to encourage the suspension of judgments until observations can be made, tested, and verified through peer review, and so on. So my point is, when it comes to the question of God, what observations can be made in the context of scientific method and practice? What can be tested? What can be verified through peer review when it comes to the question of God, Bob?
Well, now that's a tough question. First of all, we can't put God in a test tube. We don't even have any way of determining, as far as I'm concerned, that there is or is not any such thing as a God. Nor have we ever developed any methods as a result, because we have no methods for testing the presence of a God or gods. That precludes the ability to even have evidence, even if there was something that could potentially be evidence all around us, because we have no methods for this. Therefore, we're kind of lost in a very theoretical idea. Now, there is this concept of, the law of non-contradiction, that we probably can come up with some ideas that can't possibly be God, based on the fact that those are things that can't exist, for reasons that we can nail down. But we're really lost in theory. And there's some people who have no real need to explain the possibility of God. I mean, because there's many different reasons why people might believe in God. You might be just, might just be part of your culture. You grew up, just as you grew up in developing a certain taste in food. So you grew up with a certain cultural assumption that there is a God, and you've never really felt the need to question that. Or you might have given it some thought, and for whatever reasons, this idea appeals to you far more than the opposing view. Or some people believe in God because they have this experience, that is this constant sense of the presence of something sentient and perhaps more intelligent and present. And they don't know what to do with the experience. They can't deny having the experience. And so the concept that this could be a God, I think, becomes extremely appealing, particularly since the experience itself. You may not understand your experience, but you can't deny the fact that you're having your experience. And so, for many people, that becomes there. And so in exploring the possibilities of that become impossible to ignore. And, it would seem to me that of all of the ideas that we've ever had, a notion of God is the one where we need to be more than ever before committed to the process and not to the conclusions, because the conclusions, um, the conclusions are not based on anything that we possess methods by which to determine that they are indeed solid, even if they might be correct.
In order for two scientists, two people who are working on, let's say, project A, B, and C, if people are to get together and work on methods, practices, work on the data that we do have, let's do just a bit of reading. In other words, there are many conversations in this process, and you would agree with that. So let me read this. Having a respectful conversation with someone about something on which we do not agree isn't common. Yelling opinions over someone else or building a news feed that reinforces your worldview are very common in a world with fewer and fewer great conversations. And I think that we have to understand that human beings bring, to a certain degree, opinions. And some people say, let's take atheism and theism. And many people who claim to be atheists, they simply say, I just lack belief. Well, I'm going to call bullshit on that, simply because if you have formed an opinion, namely on the question whether it's God or not God, one thing that you've done, you have a belief, because an
Yes.
opinion is a belief. If you have a viewpoint that in this world there are no gods, that is a belief. Now, you can call it lack of belief all you want until the cows come home, but my point is, you have a viewpoint, and this is something that I think a lot of people are not willing to admit to. And
Well,
so,
any belief you have is simultaneously a lack of belief in that which is mutually exclusive. Whatever.
true.
So I mean, you can't avoid that. By the way, I noticed that we have a few people in the wings.
We do. And I wanted to get into the conversation a bit with you before we brought everyone else in, but let me bring in Daryl. Daryl, hello, what's going on?
Well, Like Bob, we've had some beautiful weather the past couple of days, but before that, it's been raining cats and dogs.
For real?
Cats and dogs, okay.
Real cats and real dogs. No,
Oh my.
no, I
Yeah.
thought I might throw that out there because I mean, there's so many that we use like that that if people don't know the language, we're stuck. We're gonna miss it.
It's
Yeah.
raining cats and dogs, yes. I mean, when we start using idioms, and we use them a lot, they're fun.
You know what you say when you get hit on the head with one of those cats? Meow.
Yeah. Meow.
Speaking of cats, Diana, speak.
Meow. How you doing? Dr. Jones, you're really putting me to work. And you know what? I'm loving it, to tell you the absolute truth.
What do you mean I'm putting you to work? What's going on? I mean, come on, talk to me.
I've been on the show, 5 times straight already. It's great, really.
Well, if you were not so magnificent and great, that would not happen, okay? So we're a bit biased here. I mean, I value anyone who has such an openness, because you didn't come here just to say, this is what I think to be true. You came not to argue your point of view, and that's the only view in town. You want to listen. You want to learn. You want to glean. That's what I'm saying is useful. I've had show after show after show, and atheist after atheist and theist after theist on my show. I feel like I'm just being preached to. And I've had them in my studio. I've had them on show after show after show. I don't feel like I can get a word in edgewise. When Saitin and Brugenkate and Eric Hovind were sitting on stage behind me, they were not wanting to hear anything that I had to say. He wasn't asking me a question as if my question would ever satisfy his thirst. I could have said nothing that night except for to be a parrot of what he thinks to be true, because the church, in the church world, for the most part, not every church, some churches are well outside of that modality, thank God. Okay? But, when it comes to suspending judgment, they're not telling you, hey, listen, I'm going to give you a lesson tonight that is concerning these biblical stories, and please don't feel obligated to believe. Please don't feel obligated to the dogmas that we have. Please don't feel obligated to the stories. If you resonate with it, fine. If not, fine. That's not typically what is said. This is the thing that was really a breath of fresh air from our other guest on the show. I won't announce his name yet. He was a wonderful guest. But he came on the show demonstrating that some churches are way ahead, that is, in the game of conversation. They have the ability to talk with people who are not claiming that they are putting all their faith in God and all of that. They are just willing to have conversations concerning meaningful community, and I love that. Love that.
As do I. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo here, but I think we can work through it. The whole learning experience is wonderful, and I'm going to thank you many, many, many much for that, because I've done more learning on this subject in the past 10 months, 11 months, than I think I had in the entire 60 years prior. So this is a very good thing.
Well, would it not be great if every show that I had with people, whether they be professors or just lay people, it would be a great thing that I could just learn from them. And that's the kind of ear that I want to have. That's my desire, because I think that everyone has something to offer the conversation. And so suspending judgment, that is, it's simply a practice that we do in conversations. I want to hear what you have to say, because, your spin on whatever you're trying to say right now in real time, I want to understand what you're saying. I want to value you, namely as a person, respect that, and let's see if we can move forward. I listened to, as I stated this morning, and it was really discouraging to me. I listened to Arn Ra, which is, I love the guy. But I listened to him get into it with Kent Hovind. Kent Hovind, you know what he's going to say. Now,
Yeah.
if you're going to get fundamentalists to think, you can't speak down to them. That may do well to your atheistic base, but it's not going to help those people who are really struggling to understand biology or science of any kind. And I'm not trying to speak in a disparaging way, because I think that Ken Hovind has some very good questions and good ideas. And some people would get upset at me because they don't want to think that there's anything good about Kent Hovind. They're almost like a Calvinist, you're totally depraved. Nothing good can come out of a fundamentalist, especially a theistic fundamentalist. And I don't think that's true. I think that each and every one of us, whether it be a Seitan Bruggencate, I think that he can offer something good to the conversation, even though he was, very insulting. I think he needs some love. I think he needs to be nurtured. And I don't know. I have more of a heart in this than I do have an agenda of fussing and fighting, because I'm interested in putting an end to conversations that speak to each other. It's always speaking down to each other. We need to speak across to each other, learn how to connect instead of disconnect, learn how to turn to each other instead of away from each other. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Because I have to be honest, I have to suspend my judgment, because I don't know why people are wrapped up in fundamentalism. It may be for psychological reasons. In other words, that may be their teddy bear, and I can sit here and belittle them and make them feel like a horse's ass. But I don't think that's good. You know what I'm saying? I've gone to so many funerals, too many funerals this week. I mean, I had one of the greatest uncles a person could ever have. The preacher got up there and lied about him, saying that he had great faith and he was a man of faith. That wasn't true. And so I didn't disparage the pastor. I just said, he didn't know the guy. He's in here preaching, his view of the gospel. But I wanted someone to speak truthfully about him. Didn't get to hear that. But I was willing to listen to the gentleman, because this guy, he was kind, and he expressed a few good points. And so I could, listen to it. And I'm simply saying that if we give each other a chance to speak, I think that we can learn how to come together, if that makes any sense. Jordan, jump into the conversation. Unmute.
There we go.
There you go.
Where to begin? I definitely have a side of me that does enjoy seeing Kent Hovind put in his place, I guess you could say. But at the same time, I understood that the goal of that discussion was not to change his mind, but it's definitely not the kind of approach I would take. If I were interested in opening someone's mind, I would go about it a very different way. And I think, as I think we want to discuss tonight, when someone's put on the defensive, they can kind of abandon careful thinking and start making rapid fire judgments, and that can impede them from opening up.
I mean, am I wrong when I say that humanity is suffering? We're in pain. People are looking for places to go where they can have community. People are looking for places to go where they can hear something about forgiveness. They're looking for places talking about peace, especially peace that surpasses their understanding, because they don't have answers. They're looking for things like that. And so, when people start bringing people together, and it may be a lot of hype, but my dad used to say, don't knock something until you have something better to offer. And if this is giving, if it's giving someone some kind of comfort to a degree, why not come up with something better? In other words, what I'm trying to say to my dear friend Aaron Ra, there's a better approach than just speaking down to Kent Hovind. Because at the end of the day, the theists who are looking at you, they're looking at you not just based upon the surface language, they're looking at tone, they're looking at your character. They want to see that an atheist can be as compassionate as someone like Jesus. And Aaron Ra is like that. I've walked the streets of Pensacola with Aaron Ra, and that guy is very much a giver. He wants to be out there with those who are suffering. And I get why he uses the old elbows trying to get through, because he's told me many times, I'm simply trying to create an opening for those people who are so much more educated than he is, simply a pathway so they can speak, that is, to the problems. And I get that part of it. And I understand that he's dealing with people who are extremely polemic. But is there any wisdom in what Jesus said? Love not just your neighbors, but also your enemies, because your approach may mean whether you win or lose with other people.
Even people that you disagree with will end up saying things that you really need to consider.
I agree.
You know, and in fact, there's no better way to improve your own argument than to recognize the way other people think, and how it is that what they do think resonates with a number of people that you may be interested in, speaking to and making suggestions as to what else they might think.
You guys take the ball for a few minutes. I'm going to back out of the conversation because I want to demonstrate that I can give ear, not just mouth.
Well, you gave us a graphic, so let me talk about that. You talk about how you gave us a graphic with two systems in judgment and decision making, where the author of this concept, Daniel Kahneman, I'm not sure if that's how I pronounce his name. Perhaps it's Kahneman. I'm not sure, but anyway, he talks about two systems of judgment. One that's kind of very quick and automatic, and the other one that's rather slow and controlled. Now, let's not condemn either of these systems. We're born with both of them, and we need them both, because a lot of life is lived in the quick, right in here and now, and there's a need to be able to respond quite quickly to the challenges that you're facing on a regular basis. But if you're interested in actually expanding your knowledge, your insight, your gut instinct, that requires using the system that's controlled, slow, conscious, algorithmic, perhaps even dispassionate. And unfortunately, more than we're willing to admit, most of our decisions are emotional, and the rationality that we appeal to is usually a rationality that we attempt to use to hide the emotionality that we've already committed to. So we try to find rational ways to bolster the emotional decision we've made. Unfortunately, that's par for the course. And just because I'm saying that, I'm not claiming that, oh, I'm immune to that. No, I'm not. I think that this is an ongoing challenge, and sometimes it operates in a way we're not always aware of, and so we need to be open to being called on the question. And any other thoughts on this from you guys?
Well, I would like to say, although no one might believe this, my approach on a daily basis to pretty much everyone that I come in contact with, I do have a goal. I have a purpose in my contact with these people, with anyone that is, that I meet, basically. That would be to build relationship. I don't care if it's just someone at a store where I'm purchasing something. Maybe I'll return again. Maybe I won't. But I want their experience with me to be a pleasant one, if at all possible. And from that, it's to share what I consider to be my best thoughts. the things that have most value to me that I feel like has helped me through life, and do it in such a way that it would be palatable. That I don't want to shock anyone or try to take anything away from them that that I think they may need, that they may not need. But if we can value one another to that degree, I think we can get a long way. I know that some people are basically unapproachable. I think we all know that, but I think most people can be approached and will at least consider if we can be considerate. Now, if the approach is just inconsiderate, then that's probably about as far as we go. But I think that's an important aspect of getting anywhere. Actually, just humanity in general. If we can take that kind of approach with one another, I think we've got a chance. It's at least a starting point for all of us.
Yeah, very much so. Any comments from you, Jordan or Diana?
Well, I think what Dr. Jones was saying earlier about Thursday's altercation between Aaron Ra and Kent Hovind, I don't know if that's exactly germane to this discussion, in the sense that there you had two opinions, let's call them. One of them was denying mountains and mountains and mountains of established observations, some very good reasoning. I suspect that Mr. Hovind is wanting to use his worldview to support authority. And he's got something to say. He wants it heard. And he's basing it on the word of his God as he reads it in his book. And if that word is wrong, he's wrong and he has no credibility. That's kind of a bad reason to hold on to that, maybe.
Of course, I think that when it comes to people of the book, these are people who have had what they believe to be confirming experiences. And I really think that sometimes what happens, life is hard, and wouldn't we all love a shortcut? I'm trying to figure things out. And if you have a few experiences where you feel that you have confirmed the God of the Bible, and you've genuinely felt that way, then my goodness, why go through all the trouble of thinking critically about everything? There you go. You've got it right there in the Bible. Read it, understand it, embrace it, and it's going to be so much easier. That's the fantasy. And so I can understand the appeal of it. And these people in their faith believe that somehow, even in spite of all of the problems they might run into, they will be rewarded for that faithfulness. So I think it's, in some sense, intellectually pitiful, but I think I understand it in that way. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I can go two ways on this. I mean, sometimes I think that Kent honestly believes what he's saying, and in other times I'm not so sure. He's making I don't know if it's that good a living at what he's doing, but he's making a living at it. And who the heck was it that said it is difficult to get someone to change it is difficult to get someone to understand something when his living depends upon his not understanding it?
Sure, yeah. And I don't know how good of a living he's making, but it was enough to evade taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming he's not living in a shack in Alabama now.
Okay, let's do a thought experiment for a moment.
Okay.
I have to admit that if there's anyone who needs to be crucified for believing something so crazy, it would be me. I mean, I grew up in a church where we literally believed that the blood of Christ was the only thing that could make you good enough to go to heaven. And without the application of that blood, there was no forgiveness of sin. Without the application of that blood, God couldn't even look at you, because no wicked person can stand in the presence of this God that I was taught about. So when you look at these Old Testament passages, you know, God is not going to put up with any of his created children who are not worthy to stand in his presence. And so if you had one sin, according to the law, you're guilty of all of it. And so if you want to talk about absurdities, look at my life. But I was indoctrinated, and I understand what it means to be indoctrinated. And when you go through indoctrination, it takes a hell of a long time to walk out. I don't know that a lot of what I say today is not part of that narrative still. And this is why I so need the help of people who have been out of that cage a lot longer than I have, who have more wisdom than I have. And this is why I'm looking for conversations, and I'm looking for people who have enough wisdom not to beat the hell out of me. And so if I'm going to have a conversation with someone, I need someone who doesn't feel as if speaking down to me is the way to do this. I need to be rescued. I need to be rescued out of this craziness that I was trained in. And so I got saved at the age of 4, not because I needed to be saved, but I was told that I needed to be saved because I was so wretched and wicked, and I was totally depraved. And when you are made to feel as if you're totally depraved at the age of 4, think about what that implies.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
At the age of 4, I'm not trying to be nasty about this or anything, but at the age of 4, did you even understand what any of that meant?
yes,
You did? Okay.
I was reading before the age of 4. I can't even remember not knowing how to read. And so at some
Oh,
point,
you're another one like that. Okay.
okay. And so
I was the same way.
you know, we had 3 maids, not because my dad was rich. My dad was very poor, but we lived with my grandfather, and he was the one who had lots and lots of money. He was a pastor. Now, please understand that a lot of people judge pastors critically for having money, but my grandfather never received one paycheck from the church. He was business-wise. I mean, he owned property left and right. He owned multiple car lots. He made his own money, and the majority of the money that he made, he gave away. I mean, he actually was a giver, not a taker. And he had principles in his life, and if he were sitting next to me today, he would be all about NCG, because theology didn't make sense to him. He was the one who helped Oral Roberts get started. He's the one who actually put Joel Osteen's father into business, because my grandfather was a business genius. He was the guy who put, you know, I think at one point he gave him 50,000, then 75,000, and so on and so on. So I have a rich background with ministers all over the place. I've got cousins and what have you teaching in all kinds of seminaries all over the United States.
I had no idea you were so highly placed.
No, I'm simply saying I'm on the downside of all of this, because my dad used to say that his family was so poor that his sister's doll died. You'll get that in a minute. My dad used to say they were so poor, the frog in their front yard used to have to lean up against the porch to croak. Now, I think that's funny. Okay, we here in the South, we get those kind of jokes. Other people
like-
Yeah, I'm a Yankee. I don't know if I
Okay.
get that.
Okay, but I'm simply saying that my dad grew up in a situation to where, I mean, my grandfather, his father, owned a large portion of property that is here in Pensacola, but he had no education, and this is why I'm so for people getting a good education. he just sold many of those acres like for $1 to $2 an acre. And a pitiful decision. He could have been wealthy, but didn't know what to do with his money. On the other side of my family, my mother's family, when they went through the Depression, they didn't even know what was going on. You know, they're part of that group way up here, okay? So I got to experience a little bit of the two different worlds. And so my point is my father never felt good about who he was because he was the kid going to school wearing what you get in the rummage at church. I know what it meant to be a pastor's kid with my father making, $40 and $50 a week. I know what it means to go to work at the age of 10 and 11 years old because my father's not making enough money and I bring home my checks and I give my checks directly to him. I understand that world, but I also understand the world of my grandfather, and I lived with him for several years as well. He was wealthy, but he did not give his money to his children nor grandchildren. He gave them principles of being successful, and that's all. Because he was a very principled person, and I enjoy that about him. However, my point is, in the landscape of all of this, I was so indoctrinated. And I was being taught all of this, not just by pastoring evangelists that were coming out of the woodwork that my grandfather was bringing in and my father was bringing in because he was my grandfather's associate pastor at that time, very large church, so large that they had to put speakers on the outside of the church and you'd have 200 or 300 people on the outside. They couldn't even get in. Now we had church 6 days a week and the services sometimes would last until 12 o'clock at night. Now, we're not talking about a little bit of indoctrination here. We're talking about lots of indoctrination. I know enough about the Hovens that these people are not just a little bit indoctrinated. They have gone through year after year after year of indoctrination. That's how it happens here in the South. People have revivals that last for a long time. They have training institutes and schools that they go to. And yes, some people will say, well, that's not a school at all. I'm not going to disparage the gentleman's education or his background or any of that. It is what it is. And you look at Tregelles. This man was self-educated, one of the most brilliant minds in theology that ever was. And so I don't mind seeing people who are educated on a different axis. However, what I see in the landscape of atheism, people are just making fun of this person instead of trying to approach him, that is, with a lot of respect. Not respecting his viewpoint, but respecting the person. Simply saying, hey, yeah, this is what you've been taught, and you're, in a sense, captured by indoctrination. And so pretend for a moment, Diane, if you were so indoctrinated, would you not conflate all of that with the science that you learn in any school?
I don't know if I'd conflate it. I might substitute. Yeah, I might be one who would take the indoctrination over the science. I also do not remember a time when I couldn't read, but what I was reading was a lot of science. I came to love the sciences. I'm going to trace it back to February 20th, 1962, when I sat riveted at the television watching the coverage of John Glenn's flight. I was 4 years old, and I cannot remember a time that I did not love the sciences. So the theology took a back seat. Well, not only did it take a back seat for that reason, but I was raised Roman Catholic and therefore was not very religious at all. Yeah, we come from very different worlds, so I have to try to place myself in your stead, in the stead of Mrs. Hovind. It's very, very difficult. I guess because I've lived 60 years without being in that sort of environment.
But think about this. I mean, Kent Hovind, not to defend him, but to understand him. And this is why I think suspending judgment is healthy. In other words, when we take time to say, oh, I didn't know all of this about him. I mean, these people believe in things like the rapture. Bob knows much about the rapture. You know, you've got some people who believe that it's pre-trib or mid-trib or post-trib and all that. I don't know where Hovind is on that, but he does believe in the imminent return of Christ. And I don't know which model that he works with. He's a young earth creationist. And so in that context, he's not looking for things to last for a long, long time. Many of these people have an eschatology, much like David Koresh. Things are coming to a conclusion now. We see this in the landscape of politics. A lot of the evangelicals, especially the fundamentalists, they see that Trump is ushering in the kingdom of God. In other words, the second coming of Christ, in a sense, because many of these things in the Bible are taking place, and so many people are saying, why are the evangelicals, so interested in this Trump? Well, they're looking through a model of theology, seeing certain things taking place, and they are conflating that with what's going on in the landscape of politics. And it's unfortunate, but if one can understand where they are with their politics, I think it's Nosner, if I'm not mistaken. I may be mispronouncing the last name, but it was Gary Nosner, I think it was, who was the negotiator, that is for the FBI, who was trying to get Koresh out of there. When he started trying to understand the person's theology and where these people were, he was so against gassing these people with CS gas, which CS gas is something that you don't even use in warfare unless you're in open fields. It's not allowed to be used inside of a building. It's against the law. He was against approaching these people. He even made the statement at one point to the head of that FBI operation. He made the point, he said, do you know how the sheriff dealt with the Branch Davidians for all of these years? He did it without a gun. He doesn't even carry a gun. He's like Andy Griffith. And so here the FBI, the ATF, and all these people, they come in and raid this place when the sheriff could have gone out and simply arrested him. And I'm simply saying that sometimes because we don't understand, we don't suspend judgment. We just jump right into it with both feet. This is something that I think is a discipline. And many people don't understand where the Hovinds are. They don't have any kind of empathy for them. And I would suggest to all atheists especially, have some empathy for these people. I mean, these people are indoctrinated to the extent that, when they go to bed at night, they're thinking that, Jesus may return during their sleep time. And so they're going to be, some of these people confess all of their sins and say all the right things before they go to bed at night because they want to make sure that they're ready, because preparation for the soon and coming Messiah is necessary. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, go for it.
I think you heard your own echo.
Oh,
actually.
yeah, I guess I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can kind of get an idea of that eschatology. What makes me wonder is mankind's been waiting 2 millennia and it hasn't happened yet. Do they get, what's the word I'm looking for? Do they start to lose faith in that? Or how do they hold on to that faith that the world is coming to an
Some
end?
begin to lose faith. Some begin to lose faith, but others think, "Oh my gosh, we must really be getting close now."
Right.
And I think that when some people see world events that look quite explosive, some people feel like, well, the things that people are doing leading up to this is just absolutely stupid, ridiculous. You shouldn't be doing these things. Others look at it as people are doing the right thing. but of course it's going to explode. That's its destiny, And what do you do with the right thing up to the end? You continue doing the right thing up to the end, faithful to the end. So, but I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who think about it various different ways. I mean, this is when it comes to thinking and opinions. There's going to be a statistical distribution.
That's true.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to understand. As I say, I've not been
You were never a part of that
imbued
paradigm.
that way. I was never part of it. I mean, we got maybe a page or two in our religion textbook in third grade about the rapture, and that was it.
I never
The rest of
heard
it was
the
all
rapture.
ritual.
Yeah, I never heard of it until I was 18. I was like, "What? Really?" And so back then I was experimenting. Around 18, I was experimenting with the biblical faith, and really gave it a good shot. And bought all the Hal Lindsey books, and examined, wanted to understand it. But eventually it just kind of fell apart on me, mostly because of realizing just how much it was shoehorned into the biblical text and what have you. In fact, I think my concept of all of that died before before I was willing to actually give up my biblical experiment.
Daryl, perhaps you can speak to this because of eschatology. I mean, you guys sold just about everything that you had and moved from one part of Texas to another because of the eschatology that you guys understood, correct?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, just in the conversation before we began the show, that I had moved I lived 25 years in West Texas and the past almost 40 here in this part of Texas. And yes, I did move here as a result of teachings on eschatology. We expected to be gone by now, to be honest with you. We never thought we'd be here this long, but we did think that we might have to endure some tribulation, as the Bible teaches. And as different preachers teach different brands, as you were talking about, pre-tribulation rapture, post-tribulation rapture, or mid. And if we were going to have to be here during this great tribulation, which, if someone doesn't know about it, I don't suggest digging into it. It's not really worth the effort. But that comes from someone who, at one time in my life, felt like I was unshakable, that there was no way that anyone could convince me other than this. I was convinced. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a good example of, through a process, that one can go from this, leave this indoctrination, that somehow or another people can be reached and reconsider the things that they embrace and the things that they feel like is solid. It's as I said, unchangeable, unapproachable. But it can be done, and I sit here as a testimony to that.
Let me ask you a question, Daryl. Did you get out of it because someone came your way condemning the hell out of you, speaking down to you, or someone loving you?
Oh yeah. Someone said, "I'm really going to go to hell if I keep believing this stuff." No, I'm kidding. It was quite the opposite. It was actually someone being very patient with me and considering me worth the effort to reach out to.
How
And
long did it take? It wasn't an overnight thing, right?
well, let's see. I'm hoping to be completed with this thing here within the next few years. No, to come out of most what I've come out of so far, you might say. I mean, I'm like you, Dr. Jones. I don't know what else remains. I'm looking forward to the process now rather than thinking that it's done. But to lose the notions of gloom and doom, and I've got to continue to follow this path, trying to find my way, not so much into heaven. I guess I did buy the idea that I had believed a certain thing, and that meant I was going to go to heaven when I died. But I didn't know what was going to happen to me between now and then, and that took some time uh, to leave those notions and not feel like I'm endangering myself and my family by
Now,
ridding myself of these notions or even considering any other possibility.
now, just out of curiosity, did it not take someone who was willing to be patient through the process? So some of these strongholds like hell, the doctrine of soteriology, and all of that could be, these pillars are knocked down.
Yeah, if I feel quite certain if someone had just kind of thrown these things at me in a condemning or unkind or demeaning manner, I would have just felt like I was being well, I'll put it in biblical terms, being persecuted for righteousness' sake. I mean, it would have
That's
just
exactly right.
encouraged that which and buttressed that which I already believed.
See, I think that you nailed it there, because I think that when Kent goes through these shows with Aaron Ra, he feels as if he's being persecuted for righteousness' sake. And I don't think Aaron understands that. And I hope that Aaron is listening to the show tonight. He's a very, very good person, big heart. He just wants people to have a better life. If he could take the approach of saying, I can empathize with that individual and I can demonstrate that I don't have to convert him, but I can show him some love. I can show him that, maybe I'm wrong in a couple of places. In other words, humility goes a long way in the conversation. One of the strengths, I think, of my relationship with Bob is we connect really well because there's a great deal of humility. Now, when we're on this program, we sound like arrogant son of a bitches, I guess. I don't know. But there is a great deal of humility. but I mean, we get along very, very well, and we do clash. But when we clash, it's not like we're enemies. We love one another. We nurture one another, and that's the thing that's telling. And Diana, when you come on the show, you're not about throwing me under the bus. You're about trying to add something to the conversation. You have a very nurturing heart. Isn't that what we need?
Well, I hope so. Um, I just had a thought. When you're looking at the people who are, having the eschatology that they do, could it be that they see things they don't like and then wish for the end to come such that they don't have to look at them anymore?
I think they do. Now, if you had like $700 extra cash spending money and you're on a 2-week vacation, you got to kind of keep it under the reins. You can't spend on average more than about $50 a day. But let's say you got $700 and you got a 1-week vacation. Well, now you have more money. You can spend up to $100 a day of that excess money. If you believe Jesus is coming back soon, there's a lot of hope in that. First of all, the hope that you're not going to have to live out the rest of your life and know what it is to die a natural death. And a lot of these horrible things that look like they're coming this way, you're not going to be going through them.
Right.
And so there is, in a sense, a great deal of hope that paradigm can give to you. And so it's not as if it's all just this doom and gloom, and people who believe in that concept are not really having an existential crisis, that, oh goody, are we going to cease to exist soon? No, they're going home,
Jordan, what are your thoughts?
I think that because of my experience with for example, debating with my Christian older brother, and seeing how defending my position against his and making it a little more adversarial or antagonistic, in nature. The discussions were not productive. He wouldn't be open to changing his mind, but and that's what I think that's what drew me to what we've mentioned before, street epistemology, the idea of engaging in a Socratic dialogue and getting to know someone's perspective better and getting to know why they believe something, and withholding arguments against it, not just to better understand the perspective, but also because presenting those arguments may be counterproductive. And sometimes it's through that questioning, through understanding their perspective better, you actually understand what would change their mind, or what would open up their mind to change. And I'm all for. I have a teaching personality, and so I'm all for getting people to slow down and take the time to think about things more carefully. Be a little more analytical, and just think about things in a way they haven't thought of before. And that's what I want to use street epistemology to do, is get people to think about things in a way that they haven't before.
There is a passage that's become one of the most debated passages in the Bible simply because of the universalists who have come along, who are saying this is talking about the faith of Jesus, and that's found in Romans chapter 3, verse 22. The point in the context is it says, dia pisteos Iesu Christou. Now, some Bible translations read the faith of Christ. Some translations read the faith from Christ. Some translations read faith in Christ Jesus. Some translations read the faithfulness of Christ. Now, we get that I've presented to you several different models. There's a difference between having faith in Christ and the faith of Christ. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
We
Now,
talked about
here's,
this earlier.
right. Now, here's my point. Suspending judgment does not mean that you're not critical with the text. People in disciplines, they get extremely critical, in this case, in higher and lower forms of textual criticism. In other words, dealing with the internal evidences and external evidences in order to deal with the text. And this would take lexical works. It would take dealing with paradigmatic and syntagmatic analysis and all of that, dealing with the indexical and deictic elements, the exophoric, and so on. And so what do we know about this? And then this gentleman comes along that I was talking about earlier, Greek Grammar Beyond Basics, Dr. Wallace. He's part of much of the landscape of what's going on with Bauer's work. Bauer, Art Gingrich, you're talking about the most popular and the most respected Greek English lexicon on the market today. Well, Dr. Bauer's work has been, that in lexical theory, has been falsified. And that's why John Lee, a lexical theorist, has stated that every entry in these lexicons has to be challenged and gone through a serious inquiry to the degree that, much of this will change over the next 10 to 15 years. Now, this is going to take a lot of time, guys. That means that people need to suspend judgment, but try asking a lot of people who read their Bibles, hey, hold on, we may be totally wrong about the Bible. We may have new translation models that may read so differently. We already have a lot of translations out there that read ever so different. And the problem is we have different models of this and that, but that's not necessarily a problem. It's just people offering, that is, a synthetic view of this and that. And that's what science, for the most part, is. This is what philosophy is mostly about. And this is why a lot of scientists like P.Z. Myers, he was on this show, he doesn't like philosophy at all. He's he's into his kind of science, and he doesn't give much room to philosophy because he says, they are just playing with toys in a sense. But here's my point with this. If I read this book, and some people think, well, if it's in a book, it must be gospel. I can read this book, and this gentleman is going to be, I said, should be translated faith in Christ. That would be the objective genitive. If I read it this way, the faithfulness of Christ, it would be subjective genitive. Well, let me give you an illustration of what the subjective and objective genitive is all about. If I said, hey, agape tu theou, if I translated it by direct modeling, that would be the love of God. And so the question would be, that's a little bit ambiguous, isn't it? Does that mean that God loves us, or we love God, or does it mean both? That's a good question, correct? And so the method that they're using here, that is talking about the objective and subjective genitive, is very much what we're trying to tease out, and that's what people do when they're trying to exegete or translate. And my point is, when you talk about the objective and subjective genitive, if you would have asked Paul or Jesus about the objective and subjective genitive, they wouldn't have known anything about it because it didn't exist. This is an issue of modernity. Now, it's useful, that is an analysis, but this is something that came our way in our context. In that day, they understood what's called an obnominal genitive, and that has much complexity, and so we should look at function, not so much looking for signs as to how to theologically drive the text. Now, Daniel Wallace has certainly, with this particular portion of his explanation of the genitive, he has borrowed objective and subjective, not to say that Koine has anything in that, but he's using this as a marketing point because most people in English understand the subjective and objective genitive, do they not? And so he's using something that we could play with. Go for it, Bob.
No, I was just to say that's the most common use in English, probably of a genitive approach or structure. We also have the referential genitive, where we're talking about the methods of Einstein. We're not talking about this, imitating something that somebody else does can be, it can be in that sense too. But that's the most common way we do it. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we make in translation, is that there may be a distribution of commonality as to how a form is used in our language, and we tend to translate in other languages as if it possesses the same distribution when it doesn't.
Right. And so what should we say? Because there are at least 35 plus different kinds of functions that the genitive has. And when you start the study of Greek, typically when you're looking at a genitive, typically people will say, oh, remember this paradigm. It could be, we could say, ha anthropos, which would be the man in the nominative case. And if I were to add the genitive form to oikou, that would be of the house, the man of the house. Well, here's what you're learning if you'll pick up a baby stepper program or a low rotor grammar. It will give you an idea. This could be ablative. In other words, this could be the man from the house as opposed to of the house. Now, my question is there a difference between saying the man of the house and the man from the house?
In a sense, that is almost the same, and which is true of a lot of prepositions.
Right. But it could also be the man's house.
Yeah.
Okay. My point is there are many ideas, many constructions, many constructs, many possibilities, but at the end of the day, we don't have anything compelling that would suggest how to even interpret the majority of these prepositional phrases within the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yet
If
people are...
there was an important institution in town called the House, and there was a person who was a particularly strong representative of that institution, that'd also be the man of the house, wouldn't it?
Right.
So it's just, but also it's not just that there's all these these different functions, we use language sometimes when it's so picturesque or so expressive in a way that people know what we're saying, get what we're saying, and yet we're actually violating the structures that we're using, but nobody stops to think about it. You
Right.
know, I mean, here's a good phrase we use a lot that really doesn't mean anything. When you're head over heels, well, that's your usual position.
Right.
Yeah. So what does that really even mean? You say I'm head over heels. Well, it does. We use it to mean something that doesn't have anything to do with being head over heels. You know.
Right.
And so just because you even have a structure where you're trying to debate whether it should be translated this way, is it head over heels, head above heels? Is it But no matter what it is, that isn't what we're talking about.
Right.
And
So when I talk about suspending judgment when it comes to the question of God, I'm not saying that I'm not willing to work with the multiple models of God and not God. I think it's best to work with all the models, get everything that we can and put it on the table. But I would rather be committed to a process rather than a conclusion in the sense. Do you get what I'm saying, Diane?
I think so. And one of the things I've been doing, here's a question I'd like to ask. One of the areas that I've been concentrating on lately is not so much what God is as what people do with God. Is that a reasonable approach to take?
I think those are two different questions. What we do, are we using God as a rhetorical device, as a teddy bear or whatever? Those are valuable questions. But the question whether there is a God. Now, if we say, oh, yeah, there is a God, well, another question would be, does he exist? Is this a non-existent God or an existing God? That's another question. There are many questions that can be asked. And like I said, when we explore what the ancients were dealing with when it came to God, they thought the major difficulty in wrestling with this question, we tend to use anthropomorphisms all the time, and that's the only thing that we're doing. In other words, it's like we have one pair of glasses. I can only look at this anthropomorphically. And so some people are saying, that is, theologians are saying, let's take that pair of glasses off and let's look at God, the question of God, on another axis. And I don't think that most people in the great debate they're not even willing to talk about something on a different axis. Or am I wrong?
most people settle on one single axis, and once they have one that they like, that's where they stay, and they don't. There's nothing really wrong with parking in the conundrum of a couple of different possible axes. And by the way, I mentioned something earlier about how science isn't always entirely honest about the kind of progress it's making. There are times in the history of science, as Thomas Kuhn points out, where there's more than one equally possible explanation for something, but one tends to be the popular one that wins out, and so we actually even get stuck even in the world of science that way.
People who have studied human behavior, when asked the question, is the brain wired to make judgments automatically? Well, unfortunately, it seems like the data would suggest that. That is because we are attempting to survive, are we not? And so we make all kinds of judgment calls all the time, but it doesn't mean that those judgments that we're making are rational. And this is why I think it's absurd what many people are saying. We can live a life completely without making judgment calls or having viewpoints, without having some sense of faith, because we do have faith that we've done the right thing when we make judgment calls. And sometimes these things are being done immediately. Sometimes we feel something has to be made, that is, a decision has to be made right now, not later. And so when people go to school, they're taught, no, 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 you don't need to jump to a conclusion. You need to consider outcome and all of this, and therefore much patience is required. And so they have to go through a learning curve, do they not? And so they have to acquire a bit of discipline, and in doing that, they learn. This is why the scientific method, much of it has to do with the landscape of suspending judgment. It's a valuable thing in a person's life, in conversations, in everyday life, in science, and all of that. And this is why I'm so pro understanding why that works well for us.
You talk about hardwiring. Some thought I've given lately is, are we hardwired for, let me call it anthropic agency, if that makes any sense? I remember when I was in middle school, there was an exercise that was given us. You have a vending machine and your little brother is with you. How do you convince your little brother that there was not a little man inside that vending machine handing out the items? Now, the whole bit about the little man, that's human agency, anthropic agency, or whatever you want to call that. That came so easily to the question, are we hardwired to think that way? And did that shape the concept of God? In other words, we created God in our image rather than the other way around.
I think the answer to that question is, many times people ask, are we hardwired for this? Are we hardwired or not hardwired? I think that the truth is probably that we are hardwired for a wide variety of potential heuristics, and that there's some flexibility in it. And as a result, our ability to think in any manner requires that our brain possess such algorithms as to do so. And so I think that rather than seeing ourselves as blank slates and as not hardwired for anything, I think we're hardwired for a variety of things that can compete for our settling. And I think that's part of human intelligence, is that we possess a great number of mutually exclusive heuristics within our brain to deal with the various different possibilities of problems we're going to run into. So I think that would just be one of them.
Right.
The seeing human agency in something is one of the possibilities that we have to be aware of. I mean, as we evolved, I'm sure that it was extremely useful for human beings to be aware of the possibility of some other person who might be danger, might be friend, might be this. And so as a result, it would be essential that be at least one of the possibilities that could very quickly occur to you.
Let me add one more thing that I wanted to say on this show, and it may not be the right thing to say tonight. But after examining John 3:16 for decades now, looking at all the different models or approaches or hermeneutics that we could apply, translation models and all of that, I can put on the table multiple models of this, but yet at the same time, I have to admit that I've suspended judgment. That is, in saying that I actually know what the author intended, namely by this particular passage. In other words, I don't know. Even though I understand the process that others went through, and I've participated in translating and understanding the text and exegeting X, Y, and Z in John chapter 3. The reason that I'm so committed to this suspending judgment, it's because we lack so much, especially in this context. We have so much. We look at all the manuscripts that we have, look at all the lexical works that we have at our fingertips, and yet we lack the indexical elements, the essential indexical elements of these particular passages. We lack the deictic elements. We lack the exaphoric issues that are in play there. And so why would I want to form an opinion like an atheist does or like a theist does. Do you see what I'm saying? They become these people of an ist. And I don't think that that's what we need to do in life.
Well, if I could push back just a touch on that.
Sure.
I think that the forming of the settling on some opinions is something that I think on occasion can't avoid doing for various reasons. One is I think that sometimes we grow tired of wondering. We can develop an intellectual exhaustion, and not necessarily conscious of that. And when that happens, we settle someplace. We can sometimes be not committed to a conclusion, but to the process. But the conclusion that we have settled upon remains so long, it becomes a habit. And so although we may philosophically think of ourselves as not committed to the conclusion, we actually are. So I think it's not as simple. Therefore, the discipline of being committed to a process sometimes needs to be restirred, reawakened,
Right.
pointed out, and as a result, we're going to find other people who are in those various places of stability.
Well, I'm simply saying that, some people committed themselves to, like Huxley, he was very much Darwin's bulldog. Darwinism was it for him, okay? And so he's very much an evolutionist. And my point is, today we are talking more about modern synthesis than this old school model of evolution, if you get where I'm coming from. And so
It becomes an identity philosophy,
right.
And
And so to become this ist in the sense that I'm using it, I think, it becomes absurd. In a sense, it's embarrassing. And so as one who has been, very much a theist, who backed away from that only to say, I've got to suspend my judgment here. I've got to become a little bit more balanced. I've got to look at both sides of the coin. I would rather have a viewpoint that's looking at all of the picture or all of the pictures or all of the models than just one. When you find people who are given to one ism, like atheism or theism, they tend to become apologists, not people looking at the different models, not people, being willing to accept, the changes that come over time. And that's what I'm saying. There's I don't know. I just don't find a whole lot of sense in saying, oh, yes, I'm a Gnostic atheist or whatever. And so when people claim to be an agnostic atheist, it really doesn't make sense in this context. If you're using it as a modifier to say agnostic after the order of Huxley, since Huxley took it from, I don't know, and he really articulated an argument that, we don't know, therefore we should suspend judgment, and therefore agnosticism became more of a suspending of judgment than anything. If I'm really suspending judgment and then saying, not really, I'm an atheist, or
I think what I was saying here earlier about identity is a big part of this, because if my identity, like when I say I am an atheist, I'm saying something about myself as a self. Whereas, wouldn't it be more actually accurate to say my thinking is atheistic? That that this is a good way to describe the position or the posture I seem to be taking, and as a result, oh, look at this! I am getting more water.
My goodness, spoiled rotten.
Yeah.
Oh, man, how's that for service?
I know.
Goodness
I
gracious.
I'm actually so spoiled. Yeah. Thank you. Look at that. I saw her in the monitor, approaching. But identity. For example, we say that somebody is a thief or a murderer, as if that's what they are, instead of something that is in their history as a deed they have done. And I think that sometimes we have a hard time breaking out of that identity when we own it as if it were our identity. And when it comes to our thinking, that's not our identity. That's just the way we're thinking. you know, and each of us knows what it is to be thinking today in a way that's different from the way we were thinking years ago. And so that was never you, so why is it your identity? That was just, the pool you were swimming in.
Well, I've been trying to modify my usage that way lately. I mean, when I'm talking to the average person on the street who doesn't yet get all the nuances, I'll say, I am atheist as an adjective, trying to mean, well, that's the way my thoughts run, rather than that's what I am. They still look at me wide-eyed and say, I'll pray for you, I'll pray for you. But, hopefully I make the point a little better than when I say I am an atheist.
Okay, can I ask, I'm prolonging the program and I don't want to because we need to go. But what if we all admitted we are all believers? In other words, we all have opinions, we all have viewpoints. I get that. And my viewpoint is I think we need to suspend judgment, that is, when it comes to the question of God. And we need to be able to look at all the models, and at some point we may move left or right on the question. However, you don't have to take my position or share my viewpoint for me to like you or whatever. You can have your own opinion or whatever. But I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm cloudy about what I'm saying here, but is any of what I'm saying tonight making sense to any of you guys?
Well, we're talking up at least the idea of, suspending judgment, of recommending to people that don't get stuck.
Yeah, but
Don't
Bob,
get committed.
isn't it true that if people who find themselves in atheism, if they simply said to Kent Hovind, "I'm a believer," then it would be, "What do you believe?" Well,
Right.
let me share with you my thoughts on biology. I'm a believer. Do you see where I'm going? In other
Sure.
words, it becomes more
Let's not pretend we don't possess such functions.
right. And so we're talking about a cognitive operation going on. And then we get specific about what's going on between the left and the right, ears. And so all of a sudden it becomes a conversation of content rather than us versus them. And this is what makes me afraid of the isms.
Yeah.
Yeah, but is Kent going to get it when I say I'm a believer?
Well, you are.
Is he going to jump and say, "Oh, so you believe what I do"?
You
Say,
have
no, I simply have beliefs.
Okay,
Or
can
that
you?
lady at the bus stop.
Okay, but the question is, can you possess knowledge and not have belief?
Well, if you define knowledge as justified true belief, then you've got to have belief if you have knowledge.
Well, I'm simply saying if you define it as justified belief or whatever, belief comes into play when it comes to knowledge, correct?
Oh, right, yeah.
Okay, when it comes to viewpoint or worldviews or whatever, that belief comes into play. But I've been on atheist forums to where this epistovist thing has gone so far, way out of hand. I mean, now they're giving up not just faith, but belief itself. And I'm saying, damn, what's going on? And so, these isms are creating chaos, not cosmos. And I'm simply saying there's a better way. There's a better method forward. I want to read one thing before we quit. There's a song that Joey sang this morning. I think that this was a song that played before Star Trek. It's called Faith of the Heart.
Yes, it was Star Trek Enterprise, I believe,
Right.
the one with Scott Bakula.
Let me read this and see if you guys resonate with this. Faith of the Heart. It's been a long road getting from there to here. It's been a long time, but my time is finally near, and I can feel my dreams come alive at last. I will touch the sky, 'cause they're not going to hold me back no more. No, they're not going to change my mind, 'cause I've got faith of heart. I'm going where my heart will take me. I've got faith to believe. I can do anything. I've got strength of the soul. No one's going to bend or break me. I can reach any star. I've got faith. I've got faith, faith of the heart. So, is that kind of faith, poetically speaking, is there something wrong with that?
No.
Not necessarily, no. I mean, that's almost, I'll call it an Aussie sort of faith because that's where I first came upon the usage that way. Faith as, confidence in, trust in. And no, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Excellent, excellent. Jordan, final comments.
Well, as I've been saying, I think I like to encourage people to use this deliberate system two thinking. And as I understand it, a good way to practice thinking that way is to think about something that you haven't thought about before. Thinking about something new, that's something that's new to you. And so that could be a tactic for encouraging that kind of thinking in other people. I even before I knew the distinction between those two, before I'd even heard of the terms System 1 and System 2, I very much favored using System 2 thinking of being very deliberate about how I thought of things. And it's kind of funny because System 1 is kind of habitual. And System 2 is what you start with, and it turns into System 1 the more you do it. And so the analogy that was given when I first learned about this was with chess, I believe, where you have to be very deliberate about the moves you want to make or the strategy you're going
Right.
to employ. You have to be very deliberate about it when you're new to the game. But with practice, you start to develop mental shortcuts, and you can make the same calculations much more quickly, and it becomes kind of a System 1 thinking especially if you're professional at it. So in the same way, if you want to get someone to take a step back and not make the lightning fast judgment on something, get them to consider something new.
That's good. That's real good. Bob, final thoughts. I know you need to go, so go for it.
Well, I think it was a good discussion. Great to meet Jordan. I've not met him before, and always great to see Diana again. And this is the kind of thing that we need to practice. As that little graphic you sent to us is that we're usually thinking from the knee-jerk reaction, the very quick way, and life is fast-paced. In fact, the faster-paced life is, the more you're apt to just operate on the automatic systems. So we really need, unfortunately, the luxury of the time to take it slow, to take it deliberate, to think it through. And it unfortunately, it's more of a luxury for some of us than others, but that's what it takes. It takes time, patience, and effort.
Hey, thanks for being on. You contributed so much. Thanks. Diana, final thoughts.
Well, I have learned a great deal today. Jordan, thank you for mentioning System 1 and System 2 thinking. I don't think I'd ever heard of that before. This is something I've got to look up. Well, I brought it up on Google as the conversation was going on. Now I'm going to have to go into that. And yeah, I guess what we have to do is break the chains, if you will, of the way we've come to think and try to think outside of that. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but I'll try. I hope other people can. And I want to thank you guys for getting me to the point where I'm, willing to start doing that.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, my goodness. I think you're helping us more than we're helping you, to be honest with you.
Oh, come on.
I'm serious. Daryl, take the ball and roll with it. I mean, what are your final thoughts?
I believe that we've covered a lot of territory tonight, and it's been good. I think this is good information, and there's something about hearing, just allowing yourself to hear, because personally, it seems like in my experience, most of my change of mind has come through the process of just hearing certain things. It's not because I tried to, because I think most of the time, whatever we try to believe or not believe, it's going to be based on whatever the latest information that we have, the best information we have about whatever it is. And I don't think trying even necessarily affects it. It's just something that more happens to us than we actually do. So just being open, I think, being open to hear, as we've done here tonight. I think this is a good demonstration.
Excellent. If I can encourage all of you guys simply to be a little bit more compassionate toward others, especially in conversations, and be a bit open to what other people are saying. Maybe you don't have all the answers. I don't. I need your help. And so please help us to grow up. We are here to learn, not just to talk. Thank you for your time. Good night.